So, who are the native New Yorkers, the native people who inhabited New York City before anybody else? The native people of New York City are primarily associated with one particular group, the Lenape, who speak Algonquian. The history of the Lenape and their ancestors in New York City spans thousands of years, well before European contact. The first human inhabitants of the region arrived over 10,000 years ago, following the last ice age. These early peoples were part of the larger Paleo-Indian tradition, migrating into the area as the glaciers retreated. Over time, they developed more complex societies, transitioning from nomadic hunting and gathering to more settled agricultural communities. By around 1000 CE, the Lenape people, also known as the Delaware, had established themselves as the dominant group in the area. They inhabited what is now New York City, the five boroughs, parts of New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, and the lower Hudson Valley. The Lenape were organized into several subgroups, including the Canarsie, the Rockaway, and the Manhattan, named after the regions that they inhabited. The Lenape lived in relatively small, semi-permanent villages and were known for their agricultural practices, cultivating crops like corn, beans, and squash, known as the Three Sisters. They also engaged in hunting, fishing, and gathering. The Lenape society was matrilineal, meaning that lineage and inheritance were traced through the mother's line. The first recorded European contact with the Lenape occurred in the early 16th century, with the arrival of Giovanni da Verrazzano in 1524. Later, Henry Hudson also contacted the Lenape in 1609. The Dutch established New Amsterdam, which is now New York City, in 1625. This began a period of significant upheaval for the Lenape. European settlers brought new goods, but also diseases to which the Lenape had no immunity, leading to devastating population declines. The pressures of European expansion, combined with violent conflicts like Kief's War, 1643 to 1645, further destabilized Lenape communities. Over time, many Lenape were displaced from their lands through a combination of treaties, sales, and forced removals. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the majority of the Lenape had been displaced from their ancestral lands. They were forced westward, with many eventually settling in parts of Ohio, Indiana, and later Oklahoma and Canada. Despite the displacement, the Lenape have maintained their cultural identity. Today, the Lenape descendants are recognized in various federally recognized tribes, including the Delaware Nation and the Stockbridge-Munsee community. In recent years, there's been a growing effort to recognize the Lenape's historical and cultural significance to the New York City area, with various initiatives to acknowledge the land's original inhabitants. Let's learn a little bit about Lenape culture. The Lenape had a rich and complex culture shaped by their environment, their social structures, their spiritual beliefs, and their interactions with neighboring tribes. Their homeland was called Lenapehoking, encompassing parts of what are now New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the lower Hudson Valley. The Lenape were organized into three main clans: the wolf, the turtle, and the turkey. These clans were matrilineal, meaning that descent and inheritance were traced through the mother. Clan membership was a very crucial aspect of Lenape identity, determining social roles, marriage eligibility, and community responsibilities. The Lenape lived in small, semi-permanent villages, typically located near rivers and streams, which provided water, transportation, and abundant resources. Their homes were often wigwams, small dome-shaped structures, or longhouses, depending on the size of the family and the region. The Lenape economy was based on a mix of agriculture, hunting, fishing, and gathering. They cultivated the three sisters of corn, beans, and squash, which were central to their diet and culture. These crops were often grown together in a symbiotic relationship, where the beans climbed the corn stalks and the squash spread along the ground, preventing weeds. In addition to farming, the Lenape hunted deer, turkey, and other game, and fished in the rivers and coastal areas. They also gathered a variety of wild plants, nuts, and berries, contributing to a diverse and sustainable diet. Trade was an important aspect of Lenape life. They traded furs, wampum, which were shell beads used as currency, and other goods with neighboring tribes. Later, they also traded these things with European settlers. Lenape spirituality was deeply connected to nature and the land. They believed in a great spirit, known as Ketenetuit, who created the world and all living things. The Lenape had a strong sense of respect for the natural world, viewing themselves as stewards of the land. They practiced ceremonies and rituals to honor the spirits of animals, plants, and other elements of nature. The Lenape also believed in the importance of dreams and visions, which were considered messages from the spirit world. Shamans, or spiritual leaders, played a crucial role in interpreting these messages and guiding the community's spiritual life. The Lenape's relationship with the land was one of sustainable use and respect. They practiced rotational agriculture, which let fields lie fallow to replenish their nutrients. They managed their forests through controlled burns to promote the growth of certain plants and game species. Their seasonal movements were in harmony with the land's natural cycles, ensuring that resources were not overexploited. The Lenape's land, or Lenapehoking, was a mosaic of forests, rivers, wetlands, and coastal areas. It was very rich in biodiversity, it had abundant wildlife, fish, and plant life. They managed the land sustainably, ensuring that it could continue to provide for future generations. Villages were small and dispersed, with plenty of space for hunting, gathering, and farming. The landscape was marked by trails, clearings for agriculture, and seasonal encampments. Much of Lenapehoking has now been transformed by urbanization, agriculture, and industrial development. An area that was once dense with forests and wetlands has been largely cleared and built upon, particularly in places like New York City, which is now one of the most densely populated urban areas in the world. Rivers and streams that were once central to Lenape life have been altered by dams, pollution, and urban infrastructure. Many natural resources that the Lenape relied on have been depleted or are no longer accessible. Despite these changes, there are efforts to preserve and recognize the historical and cultural significance of the Lenape in the region. Some areas, like parks and nature reserves, still provide a glimpse of the land as it might have been when the Lenape were its stewards. Lenape art is a reflection of their rich cultural heritage, and it also continually shows their deep connection to nature. It encompasses a wide range of media, including beadwork, pottery, weaving, carving, and painting. Much of Lenape art is functional, created for use in daily life, ceremonies, or as symbols of status and identity. However, it holds deep spiritual significance and is also used to tell stories or convey beliefs. Beadwork is one of the most well-known forms of Lenape art. The Lenape were skilled in creating intricate designs using wampum, which are beads made from the shells of quahog clams and other shellfish. Wampum belts were used not only as decorative items, but also as a means of communication, storytelling, and recording important events. These belts often had symbolic meanings, representing treaties, alliances, or significant cultural narratives. In addition to wampum, the Lenape also used glass beads, introduced after European contact, to create elaborate designs on clothing, bags, and other textiles. These patterns often included geometric shapes, floral designs, and animal motifs, all of which held cultural and spiritual significance. Lenape pottery was traditionally made using coils of clay, which were then smoothed and shaped into pots, bowls, and other vessels. These items were often decorated with incised or stamped designs, which could include geometric patterns or representations of animals and plants. Pottery was primarily functional, used for cooking, storing food, and carrying water, but it also played a role in ceremonial practice. Weaving and basketry are other important aspects of Lenape art. The Lenape wove mats, bags, and baskets from natural materials like corn husks, bark, and grasses. These items were not only practical, used for carrying and storing goods, but also featured decorative patterns. The designs were usually geometric and could be quite complex, reflecting the weaver's skill and creativity. The Lenape also practiced wood carving, creating items like spoons, bowls, masks, and ceremonial objects. Carved wooden masks were particularly significant in Lenape culture, often used in rituals and dances. These masks were believed to embody spirits and were used in ceremonies to invoke protection, healing, or other forms of spiritual assistance. Stone carving was another area where the Lenape demonstrated their artistic abilities. They carved small figurines, tools, and pipes from materials like soapstone and chert. These objects often had spiritual or ritualistic significance and were sometimes buried with the dead. The Lenape also engaged in painting, both on surfaces like animal hides and wood, and in the form of body art. Painted designs could include representations of animals, spirits, and natural elements, often with symbolic meanings related to the individual's clan or spiritual beliefs. Body painting and tattooing were common among the Lenape, particularly for warriors and leaders. These markings were not only decorative, but also conveyed status, achievements, and spiritual protection. The designs often included motifs like the sun, animals, or clan symbols, each with its own significance. Much of Lenape art is imbued with spiritual significance. The natural world, a recurring theme, with animals, plants, and celestial bodies frequently appearing in their designs, were believed to have spiritual powers. Their depiction in art is served to honor them and invoke their forces. The use of specific colors also had symbolic meanings. For example, black represented darkness, the death, or the night, while red might symbolize the sun and, with that, life. The careful choice of colors and patterns in Lenape art reflects their deep connection to the world around them and their understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things. Today, Lenape artists continue to create works that honor their cultural heritage while also exploring new forms and techniques. Contemporary Lenape art can be found in various mediums, including painting, sculpture, and digital art. These are modern expressions that blend traditional symbols and themes with contemporary styles, allowing the Lenape to keep their cultural identity alive and relevant in today's world. The Lenape, or Delaware, were unfortunately displaced, and it was a gradual but devastating process that occurred over several centuries. It began with the arrival of European colonists in the 17th century. The displacement was driven by a combination of land acquisition, warfare, treaties, and forced removals, which ultimately led to the near total loss of their ancestral homeland, Lenapehoking, which included what is now New York City, New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, and parts of Delaware. The first significant European contact with the Lenape occurred in the early 1600s, when Dutch explorers and traders arrived in the region. In 1624, the Dutch established New Amsterdam, which marked the beginning of European colonization in Lenapehoking. The Lenape initially engaged in trade with the Dutch, exchanging furs for European goods, but this relationship quickly became exploitative as the demand for land grew. The Dutch, and later the English, acquired Lenape land through a combination of purchases, often under questionable circumstances, and treaties that were not fully understood by the Lenape due to differences in language and conceptions of land ownership. For the Lenape, land was a communal resource, not something to be bought and sold permanently, whereas Europeans viewed land as private property. As a result, the Lenape were often coerced into signing treaties that ceded large portions of their territory. European colonization brought diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which the Lenape had no immunity. These diseases devastated Lenape communities, killing a significant portion of their population. The loss of life weakened their ability to resist European encroachment on their lands. In addition to disease, the Lenape were involved in conflicts with European settlers and other Native American tribes. One of the most significant conflicts was Kieft's War, 1643 to 1645, named after Willem Kieft, the Dutch Director General of New Netherland. The war began after Kieft ordered a brutal attack on a group of Lenape who had sought refuge near New Amsterdam, leading to a cycle of retaliatory violence. The war ended in a fragile peace, but it further destabilized Lenape society and contributed to their displacement. In 1664, the English seized control of New Amsterdam. They renamed it New York. Under English rule, the pressure on Lenape lands intensified. The English pursued a more aggressive policy of land acquisition, pushing the Lenape further westward. The Lenape attempted to resist through diplomacy and strategic alliances, but were increasingly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Throughout the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the Lenape continued to lose land through a series of treaties with colonial governments. These treaties, like the Walking Purchase of 1737, were often fraudulent or exploitative. In the Walking Purchase, for example, colonial authorities claimed far more land than the Lenape had agreed to sell, using a rigged walk to measure the land. This and similar incidents led to further displacement and migration. By the mid-18th century, many Lenape had been pushed out of their ancestral lands and were migrating westward to escape colonial pressure. They moved into present-day Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and beyond. But they continued to face challenges as the European settlers kept on expanding westward, bringing new conflicts and treaties that further reduced their territory. During the 19th century, the U.S. government pursued a policy of Indian removal, forcibly removing and relocating Native American tribes to lands west of the Mississippi River. The Lenape were among those affected, with many being moved to what is now Kansas and later Oklahoma. The Lenape who remained in the east faced ongoing pressure to assimilate and were often forced onto smaller and smaller reservations. The displacement of the Lenape had profound consequences. They lost almost all of their ancestral lands and were scattered across the U.S. and Canada. This led to a disruption of the traditional way of life, leading to a loss of cultural practice, language, and community cohesion. Today, Lenape are part of many federally recognized tribes, as we mentioned earlier, the Delaware Nation, the Delaware Tribe of Indians, and the Stockbridge-Munsee community. These communities work to preserve their cultural heritage, language, and traditions. Thank you for listening.